Imagine this. It's 2018, and a British citizen, Don Sturgis, is killed right there on UK soil, not by, a random act, but by a military-grade chemical weapon, Novichok, deployed during an assassination attempt on a former intelligence agent. And the sources we've been digging into, they're pretty clear. This wasn't just some rogue operation. They're calling it state-sponsored terrorism, part of a sustained campaign against the UK.
Yeah, and that campaign, it operates through, well, covert murder, physical sabotage, cyber attacks. It's relentless. It actually led one of the UK's former top intelligence chiefs, someone who ran MI5, to say very publicly that Britain is already in a de facto state of war with Russia. This isn't just talk, it's real aggression, carefully designed to stay just under the radar of open conflict.
Welcome to Nation Scope Podcast. Join Jordan and Jamie as they dive into the latest headlines, breaking stories, and critical events shaping America and the world. From politics to culture, from the economy to technology, we analyze the news that matters most.
So today, our mission is really to unpack this major strategic report that details this gray zone conflict. We're looking at a whole catalog of aggression. It stretches back almost 2 decades. We're talking radiological assassinations in London, right up to arson attacks targeting humanitarian aid for Ukraine.
And we're going to have to ask some, uncomfortable questions like, why did the UK government be so reluctant for so long to really acknowledge this threat?
Yeah.
And how did Moscow manage to exploit vulnerabilities like that whole Londongrad situation, the unchecked flow of money street? How did they use that to wage a kind of war of attrition without firing a single conventional shot? Stay with us, because the findings, they suggest the very nature of national security might be changing. Right, so when you hear about a chemical weapon attack in the UK, it really forces you to rethink what peace even means. And that incident, it ties directly to what Baroness Eliza Manningham-Buller, former head of MI5, remember what she said back in September 2025? The UK is facing a different sort of war, characterized by, quote, hostility, the cyber attacks, the physical attacks.
And what's really fascinating here is the strategy behind it. It's textbook gray zone warfare, or hybrid warfare, some call it. The main goal for Moscow: operate below the threshold of a declared conventional war. Why? Because that threshold is the tripwire for NATO's Article 5.
Ah, okay. So if Russia sends tanks across a NATO border, that's Article 5. The whole alliance responds. But using a nerve agent in, like, a quiet English town.
Exactly. The cost, politically and militarily, of that one chemical attack is tiny compared to triggering a full NATO response. It makes the aggression incredibly efficient from their perspective. They achieve strategic goals, punishing defectors, disrupting policy, destabilizing while keeping their own risk relatively low.
And the physical proof of this, this escalating risk tolerance, it's right there in the timeline, isn't it? You go back to 2006, Alexander Litvinenko, murdered in London, poisoned with polonium-210, highly toxic, incredibly rare. And the UK inquiry found it was probably approved by Putin himself. That's a huge state operation.
That was the first big shock, yeah. But the 2018 Skripal attack in Salisbury, that was a dramatic escalation. They moved from polonium, which is hard to trace, to Novichok, a military chemical weapon. And the sources really stress this. It wasn't just targeted, it was indiscriminate. It put Detective Sergeant Nick Bailey in the hospital and, tragically, killed Don Sturgis, an innocent bystander.
It sounds like they shifted tactics from maybe making an example of specific people, deterrence by punishment, you could say, to using methods that just inherently risk wider harm.
That's precisely the shift the sources point to, and it didn't stop there. The reports highlight another change in 2024. 5 men convicted for an arson attack ordered by Moscow on a warehouse in East London, but the target this time. Not a person, it was logistical aid, stuff heading to Ukraine.
Wow. That's a huge tactical change. That warehouse wasn't about secrets. It was about the UK actually doing something, its foreign policy in action.
Correct. The pattern seems pretty clear. Specific poisoning, then indiscriminate chemical attack, now targeting national capability itself. This kind of strategic sabotage, it falls under what some call deterrence by denial, interfering with the UK's ability to act. Russia seems to be constantly probing, testing the UK's red lines, likely calculating that the West will hesitate to respond conventionally, keeping the costs manageable for Moscow.
Okay, so we've seen the overt attacks, the poisonings, the arson, but the sources point to something maybe even harder to counter, the money. How did Britain's, a financial openness become a weapon used against it? Which brings us to Londongrad.
Well, it's fascinating and frankly quite alarming how the UK's own systems, legal, financial, were turned into tools. The Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee, the ISC, put out a really scathing report. They found London essentially became a global laundromat for Russian money. And this wasn't just about cleaning dirty cash. It let oligarchs, often with Kremlin ties, get deeply embedded, integrated into the UK business and social scene, as they put it.
Integrated.
Yeah.
That sounds almost benign.
Yeah.
It sounds more like they were buying influence systemically. Where did that influence actually show up?
According to the sources, pretty much everywhere. We're talking huge sums going into PR firms, big donations via charities, getting involved in political interests. This money bought access. It bought legitimacy. It bought a voice right in the heart of the UK establishment. The ISC actually warned that the government's current measures are just damage limitation now. The implication being the rot had already set in. The influence was bought.
Damage limitation.
Yeah.
There's strong language in the ISC. So why wasn't there a massive clampdown years ago, say, right after Litvinenko in 2006? Was the city's financial pull just too strong for the government to resist?
The sources suggest it was probably a mix of things. Systemic failures, yes, but maybe also a degree of willful blindness. There was this persistent belief that if you just engaged economically, political moderation would somehow follow. And it's not just about the cash itself, but the access it bought. The ISC specifically mentioned a number of members of the House of Lords have business interests linked to Russia. That's a potential conflict of interest right there at the highest levels.
And that failure, that potential blindness, it directly hit democratic security too, didn't it? The ISC was absolutely damning about the 2016 Brexit referendum, found the UK government failed to conduct any proper assessment of Kremlin interference attempts.
And it wasn't like there weren't warning signs. People had already pointed to Russian influence attempts around the Scottish independence vote in 2014. Yet for Brexit, the ISC concluded, and this is striking, no one in government knew if Russia interfered because they did not want to know. That suggests a pretty profound political avoidance, actively sidestepping the threat.
And all the while, this sort of silent war was just continuing. In cyberspace, in intelligence gathering.
Oh, absolutely. Russia significantly stepped up its cyber attacks, hitting a whole string of British businesses, critical infrastructure. They're constantly probing for weaknesses. And the old school spy games haven't gone away either. Look at the 2025 conviction of those 6 Bulgarian nationals. They were running a spy ring in the UK, doing hostile surveillance across Europe. Using third country nationals makes it harder to directly attribute, you see. So it's layered. Cyber, finance, human intelligence, it's pervasive. To really grasp the UK's situation now, you kind of need to look back at the recent history. The sources trace this relationship decay back to what they call the post-Cold War era of misguided hope.
Right. That period when everyone thought, well, liberal democracy had won, basically, and that just trading with Russia would make everything okay.
Exactly. Early 2000s, there was this huge optimism. Russia could be a potential partner. They joined the G8, big deals like the BPTNK oil venture in 2003. Baroness Manningham-Buller admitted the mistakes, saying, "We all hoped that the past history of Russia wouldn't prevail. We were wrong in that."
Litvinenko's murder in 2006 definitely caused relations to nosedive, as the sources put it. But even then, remarkably, the UK tried to find some kind of uneasy stabilization for years. It seems like they really didn't want to fully close the door. It took the shock of Crimea in 2014 and then, obviously, the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 to finally force a complete rethink and harden the UK's stance.
And throughout this hybrid conflict, Russia consistently uses information warfare as a core part of its strategy. Moscow just systematically dismisses any charges from the UK, especially from things like the ISC reports, labeling it all as Russophobia. They'll deny reckless military actions like flying into someone else's airspace just to create doubt and confusion.
But the rhetoric has gotten much more aggressive recently, hasn't it? The sources say Russian officials are now openly accusing the UK itself, calling it a party of war, claiming it plays a direct and leading role in what Moscow calls Ukrainian terrorist attacks. That sounds like a classic info op. Muddy the waters, create a pretext for maybe future actions.
Which is precisely why NATO remains the ultimate backstop. And Russia knows this perfectly well. Look at the recent provocations. They aren't random. September 2025, around 20 Russian drones swarm into Polish airspace. Got shot down, of course. Around the same time, MiG-31s violate Estonian airspace.
And based on the analysis, there's really no credible way these could just be accidents, pilot error or something.
No, the sources are clear on this. Russia is deliberately pushing boundaries, testing Article 5's credibility. They're forcing NATO to divert attention. Resources, things that could be going to Ukraine, towards defending NATO's own borders. It's a form of attrition warfare against the alliance itself, its unity, its resources. And that necessity, that reality, is why the UK's 2025 defense review put NATO first, acknowledging that collective defense is the main thing stopping this gray zone stuff from spilling over into open conventional war.
So, okay, pulling all this together from the report, what's the bottom line for the UK? The analysis seems clear. The nation is in a de facto conflict. But maybe the most critical finding is how the response has been so
Right.
reactive, chronically reactive.
Yes, and that reactivity has had a real cost. We waited for huge shock, Skripal, the full Ukraine invasion, before enacting really crucial laws. Think about it. Litvinenko was killed way back in 2006. But the key Economic Crime Acts, the National Security Act stuff, designed to fight this exact type of influence and espionage law, they didn't come into force until 2022, 2023. That's almost 2 decades where illicit money could flow in, buy influence, and create the very vulnerabilities Russia then exploited.
Which raises the obvious question, what needs to change now? It sounds like moving beyond just reacting, beyond damage control, towards something more like a proactive doctrine of integrated deterrence.
Absolutely. And that doctrine, based on the sources, needs 2 main parts. First, deterrence by denial. That means properly hardening everything, critical infrastructure, financial systems, cyber defenses, making it harder for them to get in or cause damage. And second, deterrence by cost imposition. This means having a clear, predictable set of painful responses, not necessarily military ready to go, so Moscow knows beforehand that crossing certain lines will trigger immediate, significant consequences.
And finally, here's a thought for you, our listener, drawn straight from the recommendations in these reports. This kind of conflict, it targets the whole nation, not just soldiers or politicians. The sources strongly argue the UK needs a whole-of-society effort, unquote, including public education campaigns almost like those old Cold War civil defense drives but updated, teaching people how to spot disinformation, how to practice basic cyber safety.
Which leads to a pretty fundamental question, doesn't it? If this threat is permanent, if it's pervasive, if it's unconventional, does national security now rely less on fighter jets and tanks, and maybe more on the average person's ability to spot a hostile influence op? Or just a pause and critically question where that alarming news story actually came from? Definitely something for all of us to think about as we navigate this complex world.
You've been listening to Nation Scope Podcast, where Jordan and Jamie analyze the stories shaping America and the world. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.